So this is one new episode of the New Intelligence Podcast. I'm joined here by Anna Artyushina of currently Toronto Metropolitan University. Anna is a smart city expert and is well familiar with these technologies. And I first discovered her work recently in a compendium of research called Governing Smart Cities as Knowledge Commons, which I believe is the full title of the text of the book. And it's a book of essays and contemporary research on smart cities and smart city technology and how it has been used, how it has succeeded, how it has failed rather more often than it has succeeded, and exploring why that is. And Anna's work on that, her work in that volume focuses on the hilarious explosion of the Sidewalk Toronto project over 2017 to 2020, and what we can learn from that in terms of integrating digital technology, data management, and all of these other interesting and useful technologies in our daily lives and in our urban environments, and exploring the political... The best word, I think, is complexity. The most tactful word, I think, is complexity, to explore those kinds of concepts. So, Anna, thank you for coming by. I am glad you made the drive. I'm glad you found a parking space within 8 kilometers of our studios, and that you could come on in and join us for this conversation on this episode. Thank you so much.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, first of all, I want to kind of set the stage a little bit in terms of smart city is a term that gets a lot of hype. And I have a natural suspicion of hype in almost all its forms, especially when something is pitched as being so incredibly transformative. So I think the first thing I want to talk about with you is, what is smart city technology? What is its transformative power for people's lives? And to what extent is our lives kind of shaped by these technologies already? What has the potential to change, and what is just kind of a continuation of what we're currently seeing?
Well, I would say there are two definitions of smart cities. And for a long time, there was this grand vision of the internet, coming in and changing the way we live. Sidewalk Labs, Sidewalk Toronto, also Rio de Janeiro, also Masdar, I think it's Saudi Arabia. Those were all big projects, like projects with great vision. So when Sidewalk Labs said that they wanted to transform city from the internet up, this sums up it all. We take internet and we change everything. We change the way we plan cities, we change the way we run cities, we change the way public services work, from transportation to healthcare, everything. And another definition, which is more prominent now, after basically all big projects have failed, we already live in smart cities by virtue of living and using, our phones to park, right? We have, my colleagues at UFT at one point showed there were some 220 cameras in downtown Toronto, and no one knew who those belonged to. We still don't know. There are some households, many households actually, who use Ring, right? This is a smart technology. So all these technologies, they've been quietly transforming our cities. And why I became interested in this, I realized that it all goes under the radar, because the big projects, they get all the attention, they get all the criticism, and when they, in most cases, we don't see a big splash like with Sidewalk Labs. They just quietly being shut down. We never hear about them again. And at the same time, things that happen in our cities, in North American cities, in European cities more actually, is that, everything gets digitalized. And with this transformation, other things happen, not necessarily good things, like commercialization of public services, or, companies that service parking lots, they quietly transfer video shooters to police stations. So all this is happening, and I think we need to be very vigilant. We need to be very attentive to that, to those incremental changes, because they lead to some big societal changes, as us living in a society which is completely surveillant, or,
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long intro.
No, that's the lot of intro is very important to cover, because these are issues that are incredibly important to shaping the way we live in modern cities, right? One of the things about Sidewalk Toronto in particular, when it was percolating and developing ideas and and trying to bring itself together, was the idea that it would introduce so many new aspects of governing a city that had never really happened before. Like some of the more experimental technologies like modular sidewalks and things like that were the kind of things that hadn't really been seen in a lot of city construction before. And I think that's what got a project like that the hype that it did.
I think I've studied Sidewalk Toronto, and I've interviewed public officials at different levels. I've interviewed people who were reviewing the project and ultimately, worked to shut it down. And what I've learned, they were mesmerized by Google. Basically, this was this idea that, we have this little thing in Toronto that we think we're provincial, and they were coming in. And many people in the interviews would say, they told us they would put us on the map. Toronto would be a touristic, destination.
Yeah.
We will get all these people coming in to see this little wonder. And so I think that was draw the hype, like at the beginning. And then many people got disillusioned I would say in the first 12 to 18 months, because the problem was Sidewalk Labs didn't really share technical details of the proposal. So we had this vision document, 180 pages, and they did mention wooden skyscrapers, like timberwood buildings, right? They mentioned, what did they mention? They mentioned 5G. They mentioned that the city would be completely carless.
Yeah.
And there were some aspects of this which people really liked, like carless city. Many people now, talk about this. And also, I would say the best parts of the proposal, they were not actually Sidewalk Labs. Those were, great ideas circulating around in the planning community. And, some of the people who worked on the proposal, they're great experts. They're good. The problem is, when you put it together and underneath you have a real vision for the project, This is a problem.
Yeah, because one of the things I found fascinating in my own reading about like Sidewalk Toronto and the whole Sidewalk Labs division of Google when it was operating was that it was a really kind of utopian sort of project designed by one person and his utopia, right? Like Larry Page's particular dreaming and however he remixed the ideas in a lifetime of reading Philip K. Dick novels. Because some of his ideas really did strike me as such. Did I read this in Ubik? Did I read this in Palmer Eldritch years ago? I don't know. Maybe I did. The detail that people would often get hooked up on was Larry Page's obsession in the old Yellow Book document of his original dreams for the Smart City projects of encasing cities and encasing neighborhoods in domes. And I felt like, is this just it was a point where, because Larry in many ways at a certain point in his career had merged with Google, you couldn't really tell the difference between what was a personal inclination or a personal vision or a personal idiosyncrasy even, and what was a real sort of systematic functional aspect of what a smart city could and should be. And, one of the things we talked about as we were kind of prepping for this show is that the smart city itself, the technologies are open to control by so many private and for-profit actors. And ultimately, the downfall of Sidewalk Labs was the fact that, there was ultimately a management change at Google and a bit of a shareholder revolution where everybody was looking at these projects that wouldn't be profitable potentially for 5, 10, 15 years, a lot of which were integrated in Sidewalk, and looking at it as like, no, we want our profits within the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, right? And that was the kind of policy change that ended up killing the project because they couldn't make those profits happen so fast, you know? And what do you think we could sit here and talk about what are the problems of for-profit motivation in smart cities all day. But if you could put an essence to it, right? What do you think that essence would be? What is the central problem of having so much private control and tech monopoly control over smart city technology as it exists?
Okay, so there are so many important issues here. So I'm going to start with I'm going to say first that we don't have to have private smart cities. It is possible to design smart cities that would be open, for public oversight, open for the companies, for young startups to come in and try to reuse the data for good purposes. This can be done. The problem is, and Sidewalk Labs faced this very early on, smart city technologies don't make money. This is the biggest issue. This is like a core issue. This is why in Europe, in the European Union, we see this big grant program, 100 smart cities. So they pour in, so far it's 100 million euros. They're pouring money into helping cities to design technologies that would actually help cities to limit their carbon footprint, to help cities to transform and transition to cleaner energy, to transition to green buildings. And the reason they do this is that this cannot be done with the private money, because every time you try to do this with the private money, it ends up badly. Because profit overruns all other interests. And so I don't I've read Joshua Kane's book. This is great, and I know Josh, he's brilliant. So what I know is that from the early stages of the project, it was closely monitored by Larry, and basically when Dan presented his vision, Google didn't like it.
Yeah, like the inestimable Dan Doctoroff presented his vision extremely loudly.
Yeah. So the problem with this vision was it was not quite clear how they could actually potentially monetize it. And so what they tried to do, and this is we know from the employees of Sidewalk Labs, they tried to come up with different ideas on how to monetize literally every aspect of the technology, every piece of land, every piece of space in the public in the city. So the chapter that you read, I was looking into one very interesting, I think it's very relevant aspect of their proposal. They tried to think of how to collectively manage city infrastructure and smart city infrastructure, because, someone should, let's dive into this. So when you have smart infrastructure, that's a lot. Yeah. You have servers, costly. You have algorithms. Someone should, work on them, support them. You have data. You need to clean the data. You need to collect the data. You need to ensure that the data is not spoiled. So that's a lot of work. That's costly. All of it is costly. Yeah. So what they wanted to do, they wanted to spread these costs across the community. Right. And how they would do it. So they devised several, I would say, quasi-governance bodies. Like one of them would manage housing, another one would manage transportation, the third one would manage public spaces. And public spaces I found especially fascinating because this is a huge problem for all smart city businesses. Like, how do you manage public space, right?
This weird concept of urban data that they developed as sort of, because it wasn't really legally defined as private data or public data, right? It was this sort of weird hybrid urban data that they could interpret and monetize in a variety of ways. I think that's what set off a lot of the citizen watchers of the project, right? Like, how slippery was this term urban data, and how much control and knowledge would it give, one of the most powerful single monopoly companies in the world over people's everyday lives in these neighborhoods?
Yeah, so the question of what happens with the data, which is collected everywhere in the smart city, that was a key question, obviously. And Bianca Wiley was the first one to ring the alarm. And then when they came up with the concept of open data, everyone was alarmed. Like people who were initially more reserved, who didn't want to criticize them. So I think what was right, and several people published articles about that, like Teresa Scaza. So the problem with open data is it was initially designed to help bypass Canadian laws. And
can we just emphasize that for a moment? The concept of open data in the Sidewalk Toronto project was designed initially as a way to bypass the restrictions from Canadian law on data management.
This is all the analysis shows this. And, the problem was that, and we see it very clearly during the ethics committee hearings. Then Dr. testified there, and he was right when he said that Canadian laws don't have many restrictions here. So what do you want from us? And it was true, and this made many people think about it and think that, well, Sidewalk Labs is gone, but the issue remains, right?
Yeah, there are still smaller smart city tech developments happening, less flashy smart city tech developments happening. That was the perception I got from, thinking about the end of the Sidewalk Toronto project, just being like, Google ultimately wanted more land to manage, more neighborhoods to manage, more data to manage, because they realized that's where the profitability is going to come from at this minimum level of, I think, 120 acres, that ultimately the institutions of the city couldn't give them that kind of control, because what was it, only, I think, 12 or so acres that Waterfront Toronto, the organization, had control over. And when they did the final calculation of what it would take to make these services profitable, they needed a full 120 acre plot of land to make it all work. And that point, that you made about how the problem with smart cities is that it's incredibly hard to make them profitable. This is something about like all public infrastructure that I think when we think about handing over public infrastructure to private management, because we think that private management is going to, make things run better and more efficiently, right? One of the problems is that public services and public infrastructure can't be run profitably. I think about a conversation I had with just a family member a long time ago, where we were visiting a cottage we had rented in just Bancroft area, like a 3.5 hour drive outside of the city. And the internet access out there was so terrible. And one of the things I realized was it doesn't make profitable sense for a for-profit cable provider or ISP to build infrastructure for broadband in low-populated areas. And I thought to myself, if we had treated rural electrification the same way, that we would only have electricity in big cities, right?
True.
We would only have plumbing in big cities, because these things can't be monetized to that kind of degree. And I guess the digital tech of smart cities is kind of running up against the same kind of problem. It needs to have government hands that aren't running it for profit, administering these things. But so much of the technology to make it work is controlled by private companies and patented by private companies to kind of restrict the ability to use them to those organizations that are only going to use them for their own profits. And so you have potentially transformative technologies that, because they're not profitable, won't really end up transforming anything, because the only people who've bothered to develop them only want to use them for profit. And this is the kind of conundrum that we all seem to be in when it comes to advancing the tech in our cities, where it's impossible to profit from the transformative tech. Therefore, the tech doesn't get used because only people with for-profit interests have control of the tech.
True. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would like to use another example because I think it fleshes out some of the issues you just mentioned. So one issue is that like private companies or businesses, they always have their profits, their shareholders as their first priority, right? Which is fine. The problem is when it comes to the city infrastructure or public infrastructure taken generally, we have these obligations towards the citizens, and so one. And in many cases with the businesses, we don't have the transparency that we could actually use, say, the data they used or the technologies that failed to help and design something better. And my favorite example here is Google Fiber. Okay. That was it was a promised super fast internet for the communities who could not afford pay for the normal cable, So Google failed. And the problem is we don't know why. They run it in several cities or in several counties. So one of them, if I remember correctly, was Minnesota. Oh, Portland. It was Portland. Another was a city in California. And all these projects were shut down. Yeah. And there is no documentation regarding that.
No, right. Nothing open to academic researchers, nothing open to the state governments, who I presume were partners or at least watching how this would develop, So the government of Oregon, the government of California didn't get any input from Google about why these projects shut down.
So basically, so my colleagues did research on that, and the reason they could do this, one of the authors of the article was actually a student in Portland. So he basically went and interviewed some city officials and the people who lived in several neighborhoods where Google went and offered their services. And so what they learned is that Google's plan was to provide very, very affordable fees, mostly a few bucks, $3 a month.
Okay.
And in exchange, they wanted the households to cover the maintenance and, installation of the services.
Ah, I see.
The problem is many families cannot afford that.
Right, because that's an upfront cost.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Not everybody has that much room on their credit card.
So then Google went back to the city and said, well, okay, we're going to cover the installation costs. We're going to cover the infrastructure, but we need something from you guys. So what we're going to do, we're going to use all the public facilities, like for cables and stuff, and you guys will not, oversee this. So we get the right to police ourselves. We'll have our own services coming in and checking that everything is fine. And that's in direct violation of the local laws. You cannot install anything in the public facilities and do not get audited, do not get checked, by the proper regulators. And so the cities agreed to that, actually.
Okay.
And still failed.
Right.
And we don't know why.
So the city governments on these Google Fiber projects agreed to essentially tap dance around their own laws around auditing and oversight of private companies using public infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the project still fell apart. But there has still yet been no explanation as to what those additional causes of the project falling apart were.
We'll never know.
We will never know until the statute of limitations eventually hits, Google eventually collapses, and someone goes through the wreckage and the records of the company to be like, here's what happened there.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to react to that. Can I say I'm not sure how to react to that? I'm not sure how to react to that. That's right now. I will fully form this reaction several days later and email you about it and be like, if we were to do a follow-up to this, here's something, because that's what strikes me as especially problematic about relying on any private company, not just Google. We can, not just Google / Alphabet / whatever they want to be called these days, but relying on any private company because at the end of the day, they have their trade secrets, right? If it comes out to the public why this particular project failed, right? That is, as far as the company is concerned, that's also readable by their competitors, right? So if Google fails on this fiber project, then maybe Apple or IBM attempting some kind of fiber project like that will be able to learn from their mistakes and perhaps improve on the technology that failed the first time, Whereas now, keeping it in the dark, at the very least, no one can get a competitive advantage. But also the public doesn't get to learn why this initially very promising project sort of crumbled on them without going anywhere.
Can I use another example?
Please. Yes.
So I've been watching this space with automated vehicles, with self-driving cars.
Yes.
And so recently, like in July, I think that was July, the local municipality decided to approve additional testing for the local vehicles in San Francisco. And that was a controversial decision. Because the problem is those vehicles, like for the most part, they work fine. But when they do not, one of them collapsed into a medical, I think, vehicle. Another one crossed the street before the fire truck.
I think I heard about the ambulance crash.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
man.
So yeah, and someone was actually killed.
Yeah.
There are not, one of the arguments the proponents of this technology is used. They say, well, if you take statistics, that's not much. People do much worse. The problem is that is not okay. If your technology is faulty enough, to crash into an ambulance or to not allow a fire truck to come in, that's not okay.
It's like, just to say that humans also occasionally crash into ambulances is not a strong enough argument when you're pitching your technology as inherently superior to humans such that it is able to replace them, right? If the technology isn't really able to replace humans in terms of improving on human performance, then what is the use of the technology?
Yeah, and so I was listening to the hearings. There were public hearings in the day when the decision was made, and I was baffled. Actually, I couldn't understand why they approved it, because so many citizens came up. Also, people who presented themselves as employees of technology companies like Google, who came up there and they said, "Well, I do not want these cars around. I want us to, strictly limit the amount of self-driving cars in the city because they're dangerous." Yeah. And there were people, obviously, who were advocating that. But why? This is a very complex thing. Politics is a, place of contestation, right?
Yes, that's literally what it's for.
And when it comes to technology, we have these private companies pushing for technological developments which have not been tested enough, which often faulty, which often overpromised, overhyped. And then, our cities, our governments, because they short-staffed, because they don't have enough funding to provide for the citizens, they agree to these terms. And this is something I think we need to think about. And I don't know, if you don't want to interject, I wanted to say something something good, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I've been, over the last 3 months, I've been interviewing city officials, actually, mostly across the U.S.
Yeah.
And this has been promising because many cities like Boston, Washington, Pittsburgh as well, they now hire people who understand technology. Right. And this is a huge improvement.
Yes, having people who actually understand technology to liaise with technology companies and make decisions, or at least very comprehensively inform the people with decision-making power about the technology, is so important. Because we've had other shows where we've talked about a lot of the common myths around artificial intelligence tech anyway, and a lot of it is cooked up by the fact that most folks talking about it are being very fabulous about what the technology can actually do. And sometimes they're being fabulous to purposely obscure public opinion for profit. And sometimes they're being fabulistic because they literally are more informed by, images from science fiction and popular culture about it than about what actually is the underlying technology.
Yep. So we have some amazing examples in Canada. So Vancouver, they've actually hired people who can devise smart contracts with the smart city vendors. And the contracting here, it's very, very important. The same development I see in Montreal. So when it comes to public transit, there are some very good projects which seek to partner with private vendors. Okay. while limiting the ability to reuse data, or say, inserting the sunset clause, like you cannot keep the data indefinitely if you're collecting the data in the public space, which is amazing, which is something I've been writing about forever. Or, this technology, it should be tested. And this is something I've learned over the last few months, talking to the city officials. Most of the technologies they receive for tests, they fail. This is something no one is talking about. But this is a very important factor, right? Because every time you see this company promoting their products, you should know that they mostly fail. Like most likely they will fail.
Yeah.
And so we should have, like my answer, my advice here, we need to have people at the city level, at the province level, at the federal level, who will be able to understand what's happening and sort of, work as a filter.
Yeah.
Because, when we take this without any criticism, when we buy into the hype, this is very, very dangerous.
Yeah. Because, and if anyone wants to go back and look at some of our earlier podcasts, it reminds me of a conversation we had with Robert Wan, who in episode 1 is a developer of contemporary AI technology. And one of the things we were talking about was the very great differences between how machine learning works and how perceptual learning works, which, when I think through what is it that fails about autonomous vehicles and these other kinds of technologies, it's that what machine learning is very, very good at is extremely different from what perceptual learning is very, very good at. And when you're doing something like controlling a robot in a dynamic space, like an autonomous vehicle, you need to have a system that's much more suited for perceptual knowledge. And the software that is driving most autonomous vehicles are based on machine learning, which is so vastly different in how it engages with the world and understands things that, the technology just seems inappropriate for what we're asking these vehicles to do. Yeah. So with all these things in mind, I want to touch on the other, to me, more optimistic aspect of what these technologies are all about. And that's the application of this framework called governing knowledge commons here. In the book that first turned me on to your work, that's literally what the title was. And it's what a lot of the other authors as well as you, kind of bring in these concepts from this idea of knowledge commons and governance commons into this framework of how are we going to manage smart city technology and the related kinds of technology and the data management necessary for it. But sort of one of the things that, weirdly, when I look through this volume and I see these essays, I don't always see the clearest description of what the experience of running a tech institution by knowledge commons principles would be. So what is this governing knowledge commons framework, first of all, and how would we see it applied in a more political circumstance?
Well, okay. So the reason why you don't see this many practical applications of the JKC is, it's very simple. This is analytical framework, first of all. It doesn't mean we cannot use it, but it just, we're working on different levels here. So with the special issue, with the monograph Governing Knowledge Commons in Smart Cities, this is an excellent source for anyone who is interested in smart cities, who wants to understand what's wrong with them and how to govern them responsibly. And so in most, so let me speak about the framework first, and then I'll go to the difficulties of managing commons in real life, because this are, like I said. So JKC is a framework that allows us to see the actors who are in most cases clashing around a shared resource or a resource which is scarce. JKC also gives us the lens to understand the conflicts around the resource. And this is something which I find particularly useful. we get to see, different levels of decision making around different resources. And one case study we discussed before the show, Pittsburgh. So many brilliant people work there. Carnegie Mellon, Pittsburgh University. So many people who actually wanted this to work. The very smart city agenda, the idea that IBM was willing to participate. This is very interesting, very promising. The reason they couldn't let it get off the ground is that, first of all, they ran out of funding, and this is something all smart cities have to deal with. And another reason, there were several groups of interest who cannot find common knowledge. Mm. And the third problem, and this is, thank you, JKC, you understand that, these groups of smart people, they didn't really consult with the people they were designing this tech for.
Yeah, the ordinary people. Yeah.
Yeah, the people who will, in the end, the people who will be using this, smart shuttles, or the people who will be, who would, benefit from implementing new bus routes. When you do not understand your audience, when you do not understand the people their actual needs, this won't work. And so TKC, through this lens, we were able to identify the key issues, right? The lack of communication between the actors, the lack of funding, the lack of connection between the designers of technology, policymakers, and also the public, us. All of us. And so when it comes to the practical matters, I would say I'm looking at Europe because over the last 3 years, I would say over the last 3 years, the Data Act, the Data Governance Act, they mentioned common governance of data.
Right.
And so the project called Gaia X, this is about creating a sovereign, this is funny, but this is sovereign European infrastructure, you know, insulated from American companies.
Right.
And actually this is working. So when they all started, it was not exactly clear what they're doing. And now we understand that they're building servers, they're building, AI capacities for now. And I'm looking at the attempts to theorize that, which sort of come in late. And, because we don't really know what's happening yet, because these technologies, they're not there yet. We have a vision.
They're not in action. They're not integrated that much into the infrastructure of the cities and people's lives yet.
No. Like we see that the European health data space is coming in. So this is a place to watch, and this is something that, as far as I understand, it will be run by European companies on European servers, and this is very interesting. And so one of the theories of how we understand commons is that, commons should be public. Like, this is a public resource.
That's the whole concept of what it means to have a commons. It's a public resource that a community negotiates among itself to manage.
Yes, absolutely. And another vision, and I think this vision is more complex, but it will be realized eventually. Okay. This will be happening through public-private partnerships, which we all don't exactly like. But in many cases, when it comes to technology, the government just doesn't have enough funds to support this. And so in the case of the European Union, their commons, they are very, very complex in design and very controversial too. So for instance, with the health study space, for now, the idea is that they will be reusing data for scientific purposes. Okay. But eventually, the idea is to create a health data market.
Right.
Yes. And so this is like a, we flip the coin. So for the finance data, for the banking data, for the transportation data, European Union wants to create this markets of data. Mm. And so when I first read about it I think it was Data Governance Act, I was baffled. I was like, oh, okay. I wrote a piece about it in MIT Review, and it got so many hits because people were mad. Like they were so angry. And then I was interviewing European officials, and they were like, this is not so bad. I mean, we cannot sustain these technologies. So we need to design a way to reuse them in responsible way. Yeah. So this is why I said it's controversial, right? Mm. So we have these markets of data, which eventually will be reused for commercial purposes.
Right.
But we also have a clear framework, European framework, which forbids, certain uses of technology. So I'm looking and I'm waiting for something specific to come out, like when health data space gets implemented. I think I will be looking into that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because I can already, just in terms of my immediate reaction to that description, see so many problems coming out. Like if, for example, private or even like gray to black market data brokers potentially get their hands on some of that information and some of those databases, right? Again, one of the things that I find fascinating about, the science of data and and the field of data brokerage is how easy it is to de-anonymize data once you start cross-referencing certain databases against each other. And you can very easily kind of connect what was anonymous data in a, say, health database, and then cross-reference that with, say, a financial information database, and cross-reference that with, say, census information or other kinds of, population data that are all publicly accessible and that one can get your hands on pretty easily. And once you bring all those together, then you create a kind of database of databases that can get you all, that has done so much surveillance work that you didn't even really have to pay anyone to do.
I would say that we already have that.
There's that too, right? The fact that this already happens, and it's how, so many sketchy phone numbers can send me so many automated messages telling me that subscription services I don't have are about to expire, and that's why they need my credit card information. And I'm sure we all kind of experience that too in like waves of awkward phone messages and voicemails left behind.
So there is an interesting, I would say, an interesting shift here. So when it comes to Canada, we have a very weak legislation when it comes to data protection.
Yes.
And as you know, like in most cases, those messages and phone calls, they come right after you've paid your bills, like one of the bills, like your phone bill. After that, you get all these scam messages. And so, for instance, in Europe, they do not have that. You know why? Because for quite some time, they were trying to legitimize the data governance industry. And this is something I think we should be doing because, like you said, it's impossible to prevent data from leaking.
Yeah.
I mean, cybersecurity is one aspect of it. But, using cross-referencing to de-anonymize data, this is something that can be easily done. So the only way we can do it right is using legal terms. Basically, we can maybe draw some parallels with the Digital Millennium Act in the U.S. I think it was 1995, right? Something like that. So basically, before that, it was a wild market, right? Yeah. You can copy everything. And then you get a sentence for that. And so I think what Europe is doing, and in my view, what we should be doing in Canada, we need to start taking this seriously and explain to the players in the field that if you guys cross the boundary, you will be sentenced, right? Yeah. Because so far, this is a compliance cost.
Yeah.
So far, you pay fine, you're good, right?
Yeah.
And this is...
People can budget for those.
They do.
Yeah.
They do that. This is probably part of the budget, right? And the problem, for instance, cybersecurity problem, when data leak happens, it's almost impossible to prove that you've suffered from it.
Yeah.
And this is a huge issue too, and something they're trying to fix in Europe. And I mean, we need to be careful here because I'm not advocating for, I don't think we should suffocate this industry that much. But I think if we start, playing fairly and we have this clear playing field, they will comply, right? You have the data, say you have data markets. You can use the data, but you cannot keep it indefinitely. You cannot sell it. You cannot use it for the purposes which were not outlined in the contract. And if you do, this is sentence. This is not a fine. So maybe, I'm looking, I'm waiting to see how it turns out in Europe. And I'm hoping this will work out because I think there is something we could learn here
Yeah.
Maybe not everything, but
sure. Yeah, I mean, it would at least be progress, right? I mean, one of the things that, I was thinking about and throwing ideas back and forth with you a little bit is sort of how would smart city type technology function if we were to try to run it in a more commons-based way? Like what are some of the benefits and potentially like risks of commons-based governance for, if we were to try to, for example, make something like the Sidewalk Toronto Smart City actually function and make it public infrastructure and make it more oriented around public services and try to strip a lot of the profit-seeking avenues away, right? What would a commons governance institution for that kind of tech look like?
Okay, so one good example we have right here in Mississauga. So they have a public network, and this is commons, by definition, right? You have this wonderful fast internet connection, which is available to the businesses, to the citizens, to everyone. So this is something we could do. And I agree with Bianca Valley that in many cases we should build technology in-house. The problem is, and this is something that comes up in my research very often, municipalities do not have the funds to do that.
No, they barely have the funds to keep the lights on and keep the plumbing working.
True. Yes, and this is a huge issue. And so one article we wrote with my colleague Alina Wernick from Germany, that it would be wise for the governments to invest in municipalities because they are the ultimate connection between the citizens and the technology vendors and the physical space.
Yeah.
You do not want the province or the federal government govern your sidewalk, right? Or tell you where to park.
They're too far removed from the daily governance of the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen this. We've seen this, say, with indigenous governance, with the water plans, right? Federal governments manage those. They're disaster.
Yeah.
They have the money, but they cannot manage this on the ground. They do not have the proper connection with the people to understand how this should work. So municipalities could actually be the force here if they staffed with the people who, not only technology people, but people with, social science degree, people who with public administration degree, people who understand how that they actually serve the public, they actually serve the city. This is important.
That would be, yes. I think that's probably the most important point is understanding who the real boss is, right? It's not Larry Page in an office dreaming of a domed city. It's ordinary people who would potentially be renting apartments, renting homes, living in these neighborhoods. Yeah.
And also, there is another thing. We should take the small, incremental changes, small technologies. So all of the big projects, they fail because they were too big, in a sense, not only because they were not profitable. And so I like the idea. So, for instance, to give you one example, in Barcelona, they invited a private vendor to design this parking app.
Okay.
It was okay.
It was all right.
Not exactly what they wanted, but it was all right.
Solid 7.
They ran it for several years, and then they created their own, better.
Right. The city did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now they have their own public app, which makes parking efficient and very, very cheap.
Yeah.
So this is something we could do, So, and in the case of Barcelona, what drove these innovations was the innovation office in the city. So once again, we're going back to stuffing the city with the right people.
Yeah.
People who were able to fundraise, and in that case, they were fundraising from the European Union. So it was public money, not the private money. And also, having some in-house expertise as to how to work with the, with the private vendors, as to how to build their own technology, because they did have people who implemented that. And so one thing I've learned from Barcelona, and I think we could actually borrow this. So they had this wonderful innovation, tech, scientific community, like here, right?
Yeah.
So, and in Toronto, we have lots of smart people, people who work in tech. And those people in different capacities, they could be helping, right? And those could be designed, once again, even as private-public partnership, but designed properly, designed on the terms that are, that the good, for the citizens, for the public good. So, yeah.
Of course. So what are some of the things that have to kind of be overcome in terms of, governing data, governing these knowledge systems as commons? Like, what kind of political institutions are we talking about here, aside from just like the city involvement? But what would change about citizen engagement with the city to make that happen?
Well, it will take some time. So when it comes to data, this is incredibly difficult, and I don't know of many examples of good public engagement when it comes to data. Mostly because it is hidden away, and most people, they do not have the qualification or the time to understand it, to read through the documents, and so I would say for the data to be governed responsibly, this should be the work of the government in many respects, because first of all, this is not free. To say for instance, we want like in Barcelona, we want to store the data in our public servers. We need the funding for the service. Or, okay, we're going to use, say, Amazon servers, but we need someone to draw a good contract for that, right?
Yeah.
So they do not have access to this data.
Exactly. Or, so that data would be protected from the, harvesting interests of like other private operators that would be not necessarily have the citizenry's interest at heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And not necessarily would be housed in Canada, like residents of Canada.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
So I would say the biggest issue here is that we need to start taking this seriously. And so far, the government haven't been haven't been taking this seriously in Canada. Second, we need a good legislation at the level of Ontario and also the level of the federal government. And I think what's been going on around ADA and Artificial Intelligence and Data Act and Bill C-27, this is very, shows how complicated that is, how many different opinions they can be. And I think it is possible for the Smart City Tag to be responsible. And, if we have this legislation which sets clear boundaries, it doesn't have to be restrictive. One thing I hear all the time from the government officials, we do not want to stifle innovation. You don't have to.
Yeah. If anything, innovation is, if anything is clear from our conversation, it's that it's the profit motive that stifles innovation more than anything, because there is this desire among, shareholder, investors, for-profit folks to want returns on a monetary investment faster than than implementing the technology can provide, and at a larger scale than the community might be comfortable with in terms of the pace and how much of daily life is incorporated into that, right? Like, one of the things that struck me about that transition at Sidewalk, right? When Larry Page was, calmly but aggressively ushered into retirement, right? Or demi-retirement, right? And Sundar Pichai's leadership was much more focused on, because there was that second plan that dropped, the larger plan that dropped, that said, we know that this will only be profitable when Google and the smart city technology we're going to implement is spread out over like a full 120 acre size development, right? Not just the 12 acres of that Quayside neighborhood, but also the new island that's being created by the new Don River outflow, Villiers Island, also the area of the east side lakeshore that is at some point still going to be developed into, more proper housing from its old industrial sector. And they just ran up against this institutional problem of, if you want to spread this technology over all this land, you have to start negotiating again from square one, because you've just been negotiating with this particular government body, which only has control of this small parcel of land that you know now after 2 years of working with us can't be profitable on its own, right? And with the prospect of all the delays from having to negotiate with such higher stakes and starting again from square one after so much of their reputation had been burned over the secrecy and the problems of not saying anything for so long, there was no trust left in the relationship, right? But if the company had just been willing to wait longer to see profit, you might have seen that project continue to develop in more interesting ways that actually serve the citizenry, rather than just, slumping into a coma, a metaphorical coma over it, right? So, there's, I don't know, I see this tension here emerging from our conversation, where private hands will want to monetize and, make profit from things as fast as possible. But the technology itself isn't really profitable because it's public infrastructure. And then you have, a public that isn't well equipped in terms of its education or the time that we have on our hands to take part in the kind of active governance that we need to do, where all of us need to read up on and be well informed about this technology and use it well, right?
I mean, okay, so I think I absolutely agree. And I think public consultations here, we need to start doing that. And I think what happened around Sidewalk Toronto, it was actually a very promising example, because, one of the reasons people were protesting against it is that they were, Block Sidewalk, they did that, they were collective readings of the MIDP, Master Innovation Development Plan. And so I was there, I was doing field work, and I was watching with fascination that, lawyers, people from who work in downtown, they would come down there and help other people who may not have law degree to understand some of the aspects of a proposal. There were software developers who would come in and discuss the digital plan. And that was incredible. And I think we should start doing that. And, one very important aspect here is not just about turning in the profits or waiting. It's about targeting the right issue. Yeah. And I'm going to give you one example. I can't name the city, but, it will be familiar anyway. It's not Toronto. So say the government, the municipality wanted to fix the congestion problem.
Right, yeah.
And some smart city vendors comes in and say, oh, I have the solution for you. Curb management. We're going to fine everyone who violates the regulations. This is cool, right? And so the municipality starts doing that. That was a trial. Right. The trial failed terribly. First of all, because everyone hated it. Because the city, which is quite big, quite busy, it is almost impossible to find a spot just, to do a drop-off.
Yeah.
And if you have all these cameras installed, along the curbs, along the buildings, along the schools, along the small businesses, small businesses started complaining first. They said they were losing revenues.
Yeah.
Because, the trucks couldn't come in, and also truck drivers would be fined.
Right.
And also people who would drop off their kids at this intersection, they started complaining too. Yeah. So that is a complete failure on the part of the local government, and the pilot was shut down predictably. Yeah. And so when I'm thinking about it, why it failed, so my explanation is that was not the right problem, right? We see this with smart tech all the time. The company has tech, has something funny they've been tackling with, something they were playing around with, and they want to sell it.
Yeah.
And they think of how to package it, and this is the packaging, the marketing we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And for instance, if the municipality came out, conducted consultations, and asked people what was it actually they wanted.
Yeah.
I'm sure they would have gotten, very good advice on how to, instead of, just finding everyone who were dropping off their kids or, local grocers or anyone else.
Yeah.
Right. That was, and this is a very good example, because this happens everywhere. And I think for the data governance, for smart cities, for everything, we need to start with a problem first.
Yeah.
And tax comes in second. We can always think of a technology that might try to solve it.
Yeah.
But in many cases, this comes down to good policies.
Yeah. We have to know what the application of the technology is going to be before we start applying the technology. Otherwise, we're just going to be sort of throwing these ideas for how to use this stuff at whatever wall, seeing what sticks. And if I can continue that metaphor, you just end up with pasta sauce all over your walls.
Yeah.
Metaphorical pasta sauce made of silicon and far too many CCTV cameras. And it doesn't end up with anything properly actionable at all. And in the case of, what you just described, a situation where just people become increasingly enraged.
Which they should be.
Which the rage is fair, but it's still not the reaction that, when they were trying to institute this problem of, let's find a way to solve traffic congestion in the most congested parts of our cities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a tech-based solution to that might not even be the best. The best solution might actually be something much less technologically advanced, like even just restricting where cars can go in certain areas of a city.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Lots of European cities are doing that right now with pedestrian-only zones. Even Toronto does that now with certain parts of major downtown districts that are only for residents, transit, and commercial vehicles, and can't really be just ordinary drive through here to get somewhere else type of hubs anymore.
True.
Right? And that isn't a tech solution, right?
No.
That's a civic governance solution, right?
Yep.
And I guess if we're going to think about this in terms of commons governance, right, that is a solution that is based on, as many people from the community getting input into developing the solution as possible and managing the implementation of those solutions among each other. And that just comes with the, perennial political problem of how do we get a bunch of people with a lot of different interests, different knowledge base, different concerns to actually cooperate together in some kind of shared governance mode?
I mean, it's not impossible.
No.
So what I would say, once again, politics is a place of contestation, right? We will see lots of different opinions. I took Gardner to get here.
Yes.
So with the Gardner, we would see some people saying, well, we should shut it down. This is just, it's blocking our views, blocking our access to the lake. And other people would say, how do I get to Arlington, right? How do I get to see my Nana? And so with technology, this is always political. And one big issue here is that, and I think what irritated so many people in the case we just discussed, it's not just the fact that they were fined for doing what they were already doing,
right?
Had been doing for quite some time, but the fact that no one asked them about this, and they do not know why, say, a private company was able to implement this camera solutions, right? Because this is an automated solution that you have camera, and then you just receive a bill electronically.
Because there is a CCTV network, and there are cameras everywhere as part of our life today. And I guess it's just, as a private company, it is possible to rent data or rent information from a CCTV network. That's where a lot of the public surveillance database information comes from. Yeah.
And so this case, I think it flashes out many important points. So when you have a technology as a fix for a huge problem, like social problem, environmental problem, in many cases you lose the political component of that.
Yeah.
You lose the ability to consult of that. You lose the ability to say, well, no, I disagree. You cannot do this. And so with technology, I think this should be done in a political manner. So we should have, one of the arguments against Sidewalk Labs and say against their plan to have this community, commons governance.
Yeah.
They would have a quasi-private, quasi-government entity running public spaces and transportation, as opposed to having, say, housing minister.
Yeah.
Who could be voted out or fired.
Yeah, because the word quasi seems to do a way too much heavy lifting whenever it is applied to any like kind of political institution, because it just seems to be about, taking a lot of the public accountability and accountability to the public.
True.
And ways to get feedback from the public to make corrections in what that government entity is doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in a way, Pittsburgh could be a good case here, like where smart city failed. You have a mayor, it has a vision for a smart city.
Yeah.
And then as a citizen, you disagree with this vision. The mayor gets voted out.
Yeah.
And so this is how this should be, to put it simply, right? So this matters. We should stop thinking of technology as a way to fix our societal issue, economic issue, our environmental issues.
Yeah.
And instead, we should understand that this is a complex political process, and every technology, it should be considered as a response to very specific, like very localized issue.
Yeah. And
then we see how it goes. And also, my colleagues, they're doing some very interesting work on slow governance. I really like this term.
Okay.
So they studied several university towns. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I know that one of them was Connecticut, and I think Princeton and a few others. And so what they wrote about is that local residents weren't happy with how traffic was flowing through their streets. So they decided to implement a smart transportation management system. And in all 4 cases, it didn't work well. Mm-hmm. Once again, right, we have a technology which promises to fix something, but apparently we are fixing the wrong issue.
Yeah.
And so in one case, they completely shut down the technology. And in 3 others, what they did, they realized that, first of all, they need to run trials, and they need, legal and, expert mechanisms of redress. They need to understand how to get rid of this technology which does not work for us anymore.
Yeah.
And this is a huge issue, because in many cases, when your city or, your federal government adopts something, there's no way to get rid of it.
Yeah. It's just, even if you stop using it, the infrastructure is still there. I'm reminded of sort of like, it reminds me of the steam heating system of New York City that was built in the 1890s and still works as a major provider of like home heating infrastructure in a lot of the old neighborhoods of New York City. This system that is almost 130 years old.
Why not?
And yeah, I mean, it still works. It's still maintained. And it was a very progressively designed system for the 1890s, right? And, it's this concept of slow governance is, I think, a necessary corrective, because I think a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of tech companies screwing up is we are now experiencing the many broken things in the move fast and break things method. Of developing and implementing technology and experimenting with technology in the public space.
Absolutely, yes. So I would say incremental changes, slow governance, and the legal ability, first of all, to get rid of the technology that does not work. Yeah. And if we do have this is possible. It is possible to experiment with different types of tech and to see what works, what doesn't. And so I would say slow governance. We should adopt slow governance instead of fast break things.
Yeah, because I think that's probably because we are about at where our usual time is, where we will end off on this. So I will proceed to thank our sponsors after the next cut, and I will thank you, Anna Artyushina, right now. Thank you so much for coming down and braving the mild hellhole that is the Gardner Expressway to come across down to our studios here, and thank you very much for coming. And it has been a great episode and a great conversation. Thank you.
It was a joy. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. All right. The New Intelligence Podcast could not persist without the good grace and help of our sponsors. They include the good folks at Juicebox Group Marketing, TSK Wealth Planners, Preemptor AI, and CIMO, the Chartered Institute of Marketing Management of Ontario. They are our excellent sponsors, and we thank them very much for all the assistance they give us. And if anyone else is out there among our listeners and is an organization working in the tech world, the academic world, and the critical research world interested in joining on as one of our sponsors and helping out the good folks at 25th Century, you are more than welcome to shoot us a message on our any of our platforms, especially through our YouTube channel, and you can get in contact with us that way. But thanks again to all our sponsors: Juicebox Group Marketing, Preemptor AI, TSK Wealth Planners, and the Chartered Institute of Marketing Management of Ontario, the good folks at CIMO. You can find 25th Century at Podbean. You can find us at Spotify, and you can also find us at YouTube. Just search 25th Century or 25th Century Magazine, and you can get there and you can see all kinds of our video content, excerpts, podcasts, interview series, all the stuff that you can imagine, we are imagining right now, we are in the process of bringing to you. So hit like, hit subscribe, bookmark us if you are over 55, and remember how to do those sorts of things. And we will see you in the future for a future episode where we will be talking about what you will see in the future. We love the future here. This has been the New Intelligence Podcast at 25th Century Magazine. Thank you all very much.